I'm not sure if this is going to be interesting of a story since it happened at such a young age that the story had to be relayed on to me through family. But when I was around 1 to 2 years old, me and my sister were at our aunt's house. My mom and myself and my sister were outside in the front yard, and she said that she needed to go inside for something and left my sister outside with me. My sister was around 5 to 6 at the time and should have never been put in charge of a baby. Anyway, during this time, she had left and was just the two of us outside. Apparently, someone had grabbed me, and no one noticed until my mom came back outside and I was nowhere to be seen. They immediately freaked out, and my uncle of the time had drove around the area searching for me. He had a feeling about who he knew it was and was on the verge of breaking into the guy's house because he banged on his door multiple times and was ignored. My aunt must have talked him out of it because they ended up just going back home and called the police. When the cops got there, they drove around and ended up finding me multiple blocks away, just standing outside of the very house my uncle said was the guy. They never made any arrests on the guy, and I don't even think they questioned him. My family says that they think once he heard the sirens coming, he panicked and just left me outside to be found because there was no way a baby that just recently started walking could have wandered that far off on my own. Religious delusion. The term So last summer, I was almost kidnapped. I usually walk around my neighborhood, sometimes biking, but mostly on foot, and as I was walking, listening to music, a car pulled up beside me. Since I was near someone's house, I didn't think much of it and assumed it was their house that they were pulling up to. But I was wrong. And just to give you an idea of the difference in the size between me and this guy, I stand at 5 feet, 115 pounds, while he looked to be around 6 foot 3 inches tall, 180 pounds. As he came out of his car, he started a conversation with me, saying something like, "Hey, where you headed?" And I responded with a very short and curt, "Just walking around." He then said, "It's pretty late. You want me to give you a ride home?" I declined, saying, "No thanks, I don't live in this area." And after I made this statement, he looked at me and asked why I was walking alone. I simply ignored him and quickened my pace, causing him to speed up as well. Eventually, I came across a house with its garage open, and without thinking, I ran in, seeing an older man sitting in there. I told him that someone was following me and to please help me, and he got up and started yelling at the man following me, telling him to F off and saying that he had a gun. That guy retreated back to his car and just sped off. I thanked the garage man, and he told me to stay safe. And that night, I ran as fast as I could back to my home. Throughout the story, I would like for all of you.
This happened when I was 11. My brothers and I had not long started at our new school. 3 days a week, Mom would drop us off, and the other 2, we had to catch the bus. This day, Mom dropped us off. As soon as she pulled up, I spotted a man standing at the only gate into the school. Apparently, no one thought that was creepy. I begged Mom to drop us off out back, but she was running late for work and wouldn't listen. I waited for Mom to drive off, and I told my brothers, who were 9 and 6, to do exactly as I said, without question. They nodded, and we walked towards the gate. I placed myself between the man and my brothers, making sure I got a good look at him. He was about 6 foot, dark brown hair, tattoo sleeve down his right arm, wearing a black skin-tight t-shirt and camo shorts. As we walked past him, I noticed something that made my heart skip. In his hand, closest to the school gate, was a pocket knife he was flicking in and out. At that point, priority 1 was to get my brother somewhere safe. I made them walk quickly in front of me to the library. I told them not to leave the library until I came back to get them. Then I made my way to the office through the staff room. My teacher, Mrs. Muddle, stopped me and tried to make me go back out in front of the school to the office. I looked at her and said, "There's a man in front of the school with a knife." She could see that I was dead serious and let me through. The office lady called the cops, who were quick to show up and arrest the guy. Lunchtime that same day, I was called into the principal's office. Before I could ask what I had done, I was always getting into trouble. I was pulled into a hug by some random lady who couldn't stop thanking me for saving her son's life. Turns out, the guy was the father of one of the students, who had been physically abusing the kid and his mother. When she decided to leave him and stop him from seeing his son, he decided that he would kidnap and kill the boy because he saw that if he couldn't have him, no one could.
My father passed away when I was 4, the summer before I started kindergarten. I don't remember very much about him, but the things I do remember chill me to the bone, and I've never spoken of these memories before. My father built custom motorcycles and owned his own vehicle repair shop that was attached to a small cafe in rural Saskatchewan, just off the American border. We all lived on a farm about 20 kilometers away from the shop. My father worked late hours, so my mother would tuck me into bed every night. I remember trying to stay awake in my bed every night, waiting for Daddy to come home so I could say goodnight. My toddler body wouldn't allow it, and no matter how hard I fought, I would always be asleep before long, but always to wake up bright and early to find Daddy in the kitchen, smiling with a warm hug. One night, I stayed awake long enough to hear Daddy's truck pull up and his door slam. I waited a little while in my bed, listening. I heard lots of banging noises coming from where the truck was parked. I was beginning to get impatient. I didn't want to fall asleep before Daddy came in. I got up out of bed and put my slippers on. I was determined to say goodnight to Daddy this time. I wrapped my housecoat around me and slowly made my way to the back door in the dark. I didn't want to wake Mommy up. I pulled open the door, stepped out into the cool night air, and walked through the grass towards the side of the house where Daddy's truck was parked. Daddy wasn't there. The tailgate was pulled down, and there was something dark dripping from the gate into the dirt below. As I was slowly moving my way closer, I heard the barn door slam shut. Forgetting about the dripping darkness, I ran to meet Daddy and tell him goodnight. When I made it to my father, about halfway between the house and the barn, I noticed that something wasn't right. Daddy had a funny look on his face, and his blue overalls were stained red. I looked at Daddy, but couldn't bring myself to say a word. I was suddenly very scared. Daddy picked me up, carried me into the house, and put me back in bed. He tucked me in and kissed me on the forehead, then left without a word. It took me a long time to fall asleep that night, and I heard a lot of very strange noises coming from outside. I never stayed up to say goodnight to my Daddy again.
When I was a kid, around 8 years old, I took karate lessons at my local mini-mall. Just recalling the events of this story fills me with dread as to what could have happened. So yeah, I remember that my lessons were twice a week and an hour long, and my mom would drop me off and pick me up whenever it was over. Most parents would sit in the lobby and wait for their kid's lesson to be over, but my mom would always go shopping or something to kill the time instead. There was a guy that was in the lobby almost every time I had a lesson. He looked older, probably in his 50s, dark hair, long beard, and mustache. I always assumed that he was another one of the kids' parents, but I never saw him drop someone off or pick them up. Something was strange about this, but my 8-year-old brain didn't piece it together that it was weird that some guy would just hang out and watch kids in the lobby of a karate center. So one day I graduated up to a green belt, or yellow belt, or something, doesn't really matter. And my mom dropped me off at the same time that she always did. However, she didn't realize that I was in a different group of lessons now, and I wasn't able to participate in the class. So instead, I decided that I would look for her in the mini mall. The guy started to follow me. He came right up behind me and tapped me on the shoulder, told me that my mom told him to find me because my sister was in the hospital. He described what my mom looked like, what my sister looked like, and that I should get into his van so that he could take me to my parents. I remembered that I started to cry and followed him because I really believed him when he said that my sister was in the hospital. I asked him what happened, and he told me that there was a car accident. I asked him who he was, and I just remember he said something like he was friends with my mom. I remember that this didn't sit right with me because my mom never talked to him when she dropped me off, and I didn't recall them ever saying one word to each other. His van was parked a couple of stores down from the karate center by the sidewalk. I remember being something like 20 feet from the van when I looked behind me and saw my mom shopping through one of the windows in a JCPenney. At this point, the guy was holding my hand and leading me to his van. But I stopped when I saw my mom, and he started to pull me and said that we had to hurry. I remember pointing at my mom and saying to him, "My mom's right there." He gave me another tug, and I resisted and started to scream. He let go of me instantly, got into his van, and sped off in a hurry. In that moment, I realized that I was almost kidnapped. I remembered all the stranger danger warnings that were given in school, but I stupidly thought that because this guy could describe my mom and my sister, he must know them. Instead, he must have been watching me and my family for weeks before he decided to make his move. I remember running into the store, tears streaming down my face, and just giving my mom a huge hug. I tried to tell her what happened, but she just yelled at me and smacked me upside the head for missing my karate lesson. She took me back to the karate center. My sensei explained to her that my lessons were at a different time now that I have gone up a belt color. He probably explained this to my mom before, but as you can tell by reading this, I didn't have the most responsible parents. I tried telling my mom about the guy, who said he was her friend, but she ignored me. She said something like he must have thought I was another kid or something. God, my mom is such a fucking idiot. But I was too young to linger on it or do anything about it, so that memory just festered in me for years. And every year that went by, I became a little wiser and a little more terrified of what could have happened to me if I had gotten in that van.
Long story short, I haven't seen my mother in a very long time. Since I was maybe 13 or 14, and between being born and her disappearing forever, I didn't see her all that much based on the fact that she had very little interest in me or being a mom in general. I was younger when this happened. My grandmother got me into ghost stories, and so they didn't really scare me particularly. When I was maybe 7 or 8, I was used to my mom not really paying attention to me, and we resided in a house with her mother where I spent most of my days alone or with my grandma, who was literally insane. She'd buy me things and tell me how sorry my mother was for everything she'd done to me. It was bullshit. It was a dismal existence in that house, and it was my last full day before going back to where I was happy, my father's mother's house. Anyway, my mother looked like shit. She was heavy into cocaine, and she just looks at me. "Hey, you want to go see something cool?" I thought it was that day that her mom said would come, when she'd finally quit treating me like I didn't exist. I just nodded and followed her out to her car,
We live in Colorado, and my mother was based in a little one-horse town in Washington State. She hadn't been in Colorado much. She'd come when I was 2 years old, I think. Needless to say, she didn't know Colorado very well. So we got in the car and we began driving. We drove past every single place that I knew, and I asked her where we were going. She didn't reply. We ended up in a tiny town, smaller than her hometown. All the buildings were old, and both the restaurant and bookstore we went into smelled musty. We spent some time in a used bookstore, where she immediately left me and went to her own section. She often just left me alone in public places, and had left me in them a few times, so I thought moms were just supposed to do that. I went to the kids' books, and after a while my mother came and found me and said, "Let's go." Thinking the adventure was over, I got into the car and thought nothing more of it. When I settled in the car and was ready to go over to my other grandmother's house already, she looked back at me and said we were going to that cool place she was talking about. I sat back and waited and watched out the window, and my mother stopped at a very old cemetery. I felt my small chest tighten as my mom got out of the car and looked at me expecting me to get out of the car. I did so, and like in the bookstore, she wandered off. The huge lot had all big tombstones all sticking out of the ground, so I wandered around for a while and all that. After probably an hour or so of wandering around the cemetery on my own, looking for my mother, she popped up out of nowhere and said she wanted my picture. She put me next to a random tombstone and snapped a picture with her camera she apparently kept in her purse. Most of my life I was terrified of my mother, and when she left when I was 13, she was taken away for something I don't really feel comfortable talking about. However, when I found out that something was actually off with her, and that she was considered as mentally gone as my grandmother, I can't help but think of what was going through her mind, and what possessed her to bring me to a cemetery in a town I'd never been to. Scary or not to you, it haunts me.
This is a story that I've heard from multiple members of my family. It didn't happen to me personally, but I have no reason not to believe what I've been told. I don't know the timeline or any details about the case, but I know that it's definitely true. I had an aunt who lived in Cleveland, Ohio, and worked for some sort of agency helping convicted criminals rebuild their lives after getting out of jail. I don't know the name of the place she worked, but I know that they were involved in the employment of felons as well as lower criminals. My aunt worked directly with the clients, finding out all the kinds of things that they were qualified to do, what skills they might have, what they enjoyed, that kind of thing. She had a lot of experience talking to people who have done terrible things in their lives, but she never judged them for it or assumed that they would continue their criminality. The agency had to check the clients to see if they were genuinely interested in changing their lives, so most of them just really wanted help in becoming legitimate. She had one client who had a very hard time with transportation. He didn't live anywhere near a bus station and thus had a hard time getting to and from the agency as well as to any job. In the months that my aunt worked with this man, they became friendly, and at one point, she offered to help him with transportation when she could. This is how she ended up picking him up and dropping him off at his house. I assume that whatever job they found for this guy was close to where my aunt worked, so she would just take him on her way home. She said that he was nice enough, kind of quiet and eccentric, but nothing too strange. At one point, when she dropped him off, he invited her in for a drink, but their professional relationship disallowed her from doing so. After a while, this guy apparently got on his feet, and left the agency, fending for himself. My aunt pretty much forgot about it. After some period of time, I'm not sure how long, perhaps anywhere from a few months to a year or two, my aunt sees this guy's face on television. The police had stormed his house, I think after complaints from his neighbors, and found a horror show inside. He had murdered something like 7 girls and women and hid them beneath his floorboards. According to the forensics, his victims had been killed different times, ranging from very recent to before my aunt had known him. So basically, this guy was actively killing at the time she was driving him to and from his house.
My encounters with this individual, who I'll call Ben, began in November 2024 in school. He was a friend of one of my friends, Tom, and eventually we became part of the same friend group. I've always found Ben a bit creepy, which seemed to be the school population's general view towards him. However, once we began regularly socializing, I began to feel bad for my presumptions. That was until we were added to a WhatsApp group chat, and that was when things started to turn. First, it was the constant mindless images of gore that he would send, pictures involving torture victims and murdered children. I don't know if the images were real, but they made me very uncomfortable, and I asked him to stop, and he responded by telling me to take a joke and to stop being a baby. And after that, he began sending messages claiming that he had killed a cat, along with disturbing fantasies involving people I knew. I wasn't sure if Ben was just your typical edgelord, which is what my other friends thought, but something about it didn't feel right. Then, one Saturday, I was alone Christmas shopping in town when I noticed Ben standing down the road, just sort of staring directly at me. I waved at him awkwardly, but he just kept staring before casually walking into a side street. For the rest of the trip, every time I turned around, Ben seemed to be there, always at a distance and always staring. And eventually I gave up shopping and went home, kind of angry, and I texted him about it, and he just said that he didn't know what I was talking about. Later, during lunch at school, Ben and another friend, Jack, convinced me and a third friend, Zach, to come with them into the forest behind our school. It was stupid, I know, but I was bored and decided to go. And as we ventured deeper into the woods, Ben started acting strange, laughing and repeating, "Closer. Closer." Eventually, both Zach and I agreed that it was creepy and decided to head back. And Ben seemed pissed when he and Jack returned. And when we asked why they wanted us to keep going, Ben said he wanted to set a fire and show us. And after that, I distanced myself and left that group chat, though I was eventually re-added. While I was on break from the group, Ben attacked Tom at school with a homemade blade, and I believe it was a razor from a pencil sharpener. Tom ended up with a wound near his wrist, and Ben was expelled from school, though no legal action was taken. And it's been about a month since then. When I was re-added to the group, I found that Ben had been sending graphic photos of himself doing things to himself and ranting about how he hates his family, blaming them for his misfortunes. I'm genuinely worried. He gives off killer vibes, but maybe I'm just being paranoid. And I often think about that time in the forest and in the town plaza. Anyways, should I be concerned or am I just overreacting? Sometimes I worry that Ben knows where I live and that he's not far away. I am originally from Pakistan, specifically from a village near the city of Gujarat. The village is like a really small town, essentially. It has a hill in the middle with a 100-year-old home on top and some really old trees. The trees are like the ones you see in those horror movies, really dark with weed-like things hanging off of them. The home belongs to the village's Nawab, which is a social caste in Pakistan, a high one rather. The home is decorated with amazing tiles that after 100 years still look amazing. The rest of the home is deteriorated due to the Nawabs moving out of the village. My grandparents' home is in the same village and is pretty much ancient to any modern eyes, and smack in the middle of the home is a grave of some supposed saint. It's more like a tomb with a decorated door. You can go inside and actually see the grave. It's actually quite a nice grave, decorated with marble tiles, has some calligraphy on it, and even has its own lighting. I assume all of this is to show respect to the saint. My mother, after she got married to my father, lived in that home with my grandparents since it's Pakistani custom that the wife go live with the in-laws after marriage. One day she told me that she decided to take a nap outside near the grave. She goes on to say that she woke up from her nap, and when she opened her eyes, she saw this extremely tall figure. She described his height as never-ending. It almost looked like his head touched the sky. She said he was wearing a traditional Pakistani men's dress called a shalwar kameez. She didn't see the man's face, but said his feet were huge. This was spooky enough on its own, but what spooked me out even more is when she told the story again at a family gathering. Her twin sister said that when she was visiting her a few years back, she too decided to take a nap near the grave and woke up to the same figure. Never-ending height, same dress but in a different color. That same aunt who is into spiritualism and even deciphers dreams says that she thinks the saint protects the home. I have to admit, even I felt weirded out by the grave sometimes, but never felt anything malevolent coming from it. Then again, I am not really a spiritual person. I asked my dad, who lived in that house for his childhood. He said his aunt said that one day she was alone in the house, and around dawn time, she would usually light a lamp in the tomb. This particular day she forgot to, or for some reason didn't. She then went on to say that at dawn, when she would go to lock the door leading outside, the lock would keep opening when she'd return to her room. The way she knew this is because this was an old door with old locks with those metal rods and handles you twist and turn to lock. They make a lot of sound when being opened or closed. Now to get back to the outside door, you have to pass that tomb. She said that she locked the outside door 3 times, but it kept opening for some odd reason. She said the 4th time she went to lock the door, on the way she decided to light the lamp in the tomb, then went to lock the door. After that attempt, it didn't open at all. My dad also tells me that this isn't the only grave in the village. He also said that he ordered the grave to be renovated and a tomb to be made to protect it from the elements. He says that there's a bunch of graves inside land owned by folks and even inside of other people's homes. So you never know what kind of spirits or entities lurk around there.
I am aware this happened ages ago, but I am now recollecting my bits and pieces from the event and am thankful to be sane and safe. I'm honestly just airing it out so I can get input and opinions because I don't know what to make of it. And I'll preface this by saying that this happened a while ago, 2019, when I was 16 years old, hence I was very naive and gullible. I am aware that it might not be a human trafficking case, but it does seem suspicious regardless. And for context, this happened in a relatively large North American city. It was late December, and a few days before Christmas, I had just finished hanging out with my friends and was using public transit, the subway, to get back home. My friends lived in a different area, so I had to travel back alone in that direction. The subway wagons were mostly empty, it was already dark out, and I recall it being around 8 to 9 p.m., maybe. And I was sitting on an individual seat where the setup was structured in a way that had an other seat perpendicular to my current one, which was empty currently. This one guy, who looked to be relatively young, plopped down on that adjacent seat and greeted me with a smile instantly. I didn't think too much of it at the time, since in all honesty I thought he was cute. Physically, he had a middle-part, chestnut hair and was relatively tall and very slim. Nice facial features too. I don't remember his face in a very detailed manner, but I remember thinking that he was really cute. He was dressed in a sweater and jeans and didn't look dismantled or overly casual either. And upon sitting down, he greeted me smiling, presented himself, and shared his name. We then started making small talk, and he brought up the fact that he had finished university, which made me ask for his age, and he claimed to be 24, which seemed to match with his appearance.
What really creeps me out is that in response, I told him that I was 16 years old and he didn't even seem slightly fazed by that. Matter of fact, he was smirking and had formed a visible grin, talking about how he missed being young and advising me to stay in school. He proceeded with asking me about what I was doing in the metro, my plans before that, and if I had any plans coming up in the next few hours, to which I stupidly answered no. He then started expressing how his friends had come up with a supposed dare, where he had to bring a random girl over, a complete stranger, to their party or hangout by accosting them randomly, such as this very occasion, I guess. I remember finding it hard to believe, so I insisted on going home about a handful of times, to which he started pleading with me, claiming it would be fun, and if I were to be uncomfortable, he would bring me right back to the subway station. I kept insisting that my mom would get mad and asked if there was another day where we could do that, but he answered that it was a one-time thing, that it's a very uncommon gathering, that he hasn't seen these friends in a long time and wouldn't see them after the event, most probably because of a full schedule. And he also kept pushing the fact that he wouldn't be keeping me up for too long. And I eventually gave in. I know, super stupid, and I still can't believe it to this day. And we had to go through a few subway stations and got off in a pretty desolate area which was well known for its drug use and prostitution and poverty. But to be frank, I didn't know that at the time, although it was pretty obvious. The specific neighborhood still has a pretty tarnished reputation to this day. And the guy, Ben was his name, then revealed his real name to be different than the one he initially had given me and was seemingly Slavic. The name he revealed is most likely also fake too, I imagine. And he then started asking me pretty intrusive questions such as, what are your darkest secrets? What's your home life like? What's stressing you out right now? Why did you decide to come along? And he claimed to like getting to know people beyond the surface level, hence why he was being so intrusive all of a sudden. I, in all honesty, was a straight-A student, so I simply told him that studies were my main concern as of now, to which he answered that there had to be more than that. And we had to be about 15 minutes in at this point when a car slowed down next to us and rolled down its windows. A man let out a hey, but was immediately shooed away by Ben. Ben then told me that the man was a supposed John, which I didn't know meant that the driver was essentially a client in that sense. And I started to get wary but still made it to the hangout a few minutes later, which was located in a regular townhouse. It wasn't worn down or anything. I was greeted by maybe 5 to 6 dudes who were seemingly over 25. 2 of them looked above 30 as well, and they all stared me down and immediately asked how old I was, and I told them I was 16. One of the guys seemed sort of phased and let out a, "Come on, man, that's my sister's age. They might even be in the same school." And they all kind of laughed it off and moved on, and then never spoke about it again and barely asked me any questions except, "How'd you guys meet?" Also, it was obvious that someone's dad had owned the place, as an old man was dozing off on the couch, and we all gathered around a dinner table. The host served me some food along with the other guests, but I refused to eat as I was honestly starting to feel a bit queasy about this situation. And after everyone except me finished eating, we all went upstairs. Ben started playing the guitar, and another man joined in by playing some keys on a piano. They then asked me to film them using Ben's phone, so I did. When that was going on, I honestly started getting terrible vibes and felt the need to leave, so I put the phone down and slowly made my way through the frame of the door. One of the older guys was standing near it and asked me what was up and if I was enjoying their company. We started talking for a minute and he claimed to be an accountant. He then was starting to lean in and tried to slightly hover over me against the door frame. However, I stepped back into the staircase and made it to the front door, opened it, and went out to the driveway. Luckily, the door wasn't locked. Ben followed and asked me if I wanted to leave, and I immediately said yeah, and this time, he didn't insist on bringing me back in. I should also add that right before leaving, I had told Ben that my mom was relentlessly calling me and was worried, to which he obliged. On our way back, he proceeded to ask me if I was genuinely 16 and not below that. He told me that if he were my dad, he would never let me out of sight again, because what I just did, which was going to the party in the first place, was the dumbest thing he'd seen any girl do, especially since I had no reason to do that according to him. Once he accompanied me back to the subway station, I asked him for his Snapchat. I was a complete moron, or any other type of social media he had, and he told me he doesn't use his phone like that and was fully off the grid. I went back home, and I've never heard of him again. Although I didn't get conventionally harassed, like violence or anything else, and it's a pretty outdated happening, I'm honestly scared that I could have been a potential human trafficking victim, and it might be a stretch, but you never know. I want to know if there's any way that I could leave an anonymous tip to the city or something. I was searching through public records, but I couldn't find anything. But what do you guys make of this story? I have a 10-month-old son, great kid, and is starting to crawl and move around on his own. Tonight, before I put him to bed, he passed out on this big pillow in our living room after he had a bottle. I picked him up and put him in his crib in his room down the hall, then let the dog out and sat down to watch some TV before I brushed my teeth and went to bed. My dog walked down the hall to my bedroom to go to bed, and about an hour later, I get up to turn the TV off and notice my son asleep, facing away from me on the same pillow I picked him up from an hour before. Now, thinking that given his skill level at walking and crawling, there's no way he was getting out of his crib, down the hall and back there, I chalked it up to me not paying attention. So I walked over, picked him up, slung him over my left shoulder, went over to the front window, shut that, and went back down the hall to go to put him to bed. I opened the door to his room, turned the corner, and with the dim light from the nightlight, noticed that he is in his crib, rolled towards me, asleep. It took me a second to put together what was happening. How did I have him on my shoulder, and he was in the bed at the same time? What felt like a millisecond later, I heard my dog kind of bark or whimper in a confused tone right behind me. Then I looked to my left, bringing my arm down to see that his stuffed animal monkey is in my arm. Now, I am sure as anything in my life that I picked up my son, and that I would have known the difference between a 25-pound kid and a 1-pound stuffed animal. Now, I've checked the carbon monoxide detector, the windows were open, and I've only had a single beer tonight. The weirdest thing, though, is my big old black lab will not leave my son's room. I truly, really am baffled. I met them when I was 15. He was 17, and looking back, the signs were all there. It started with small things. Us just roughhousing like buddies. We were both guys, but it would escalate to them taking me back behind the shed where my friends couldn't see and holding me against the wall and fake hitting me, sort of pretending to hurt me while laughing the whole time. But he did actually hurt me. I would have bruises for weeks. One time he literally shoved my face into stinging nettles, but my naive 15-year-old self thought it was all good and fun. If only I knew then what I would know now. So we started dating at the end of my sophomore year, and over the summer things progressed. He used to beg me to give him massages, and whenever I would refuse, he would pin me down and tickle me until I relented and said yes. And when I stopped before he was ready, he'd go back to tickling me. Sometimes he would just randomly pin me down and tickle me, and I would beg him to stop, but the only way to get him to stop was to literally fight him off of me. And this happened almost every single time we hung out, and I grew to dread it, and I don't know why I kept going back. Honestly, I was just so in love with him. I'm 5'3" and weigh even less than I do now, about 100 pounds, and he's 5'7" and lifts weights for context. And I learned a lot about how to fight someone bigger off of me in those days. And it wasn't just tickling, though. As I said before, they used to jokingly beat me up, but the force of his punches was not a joke. I would have bruises all over my arms and thighs from them punching me, and one time, I got in the front seat of our friend's car when he wanted shotguns, so he proceeded to punch my arm the entire 15-minute drive until I was almost crying because I kept trying to move away and tell them to stop. My friend who was driving did nothing. I don't know why. He was even older than both of us, and I don't know why he thought that was normal. It wasn't just punching me either. I had recently gotten my ear pierced, and he thought it was so funny to smack me upside the head, and once he made me bleed, and when I told him, he just said he hadn't. And I tried to talk to him about this so many times, asking, please, just don't touch my ears. And every time I asked, all he would do was correct my grammar. And this was over text. I was honestly scared to say anything in person. And here's an example of me trying to talk to him from August 2021. Now, we ended up breaking up and just staying friends, and I spent all of my free time at his house like an idiot. Another thing he started doing was always wanting to smoke me up, but never smoking himself. Huge red flag, I know, but at the time all I was thinking was more weed for me. And I say all of this to explain what our relationship was like and how utterly confusing this all was for me. And to this day, I am still confused why they acted this way. And now for the part where I think he actually tried to kill me. I was 16 now, he was 19, and the day started off normal. We were just hanging out, and from what I remember, this time period is kind of spotty as a memory for me, and the next thing I remember is him sitting on top of my chest and arms, pinning me down like he would normally do to tickle me. But this time, he had both hands around my neck, choking me. Not in a sensual way, like both hands on my windpipe, and I couldn't breathe and could barely talk. And I kept hitting his hands and arms, trying to pull him off my neck. It wasn't working. I was trying to say that I can't breathe, let go of me, but as I said, I could barely talk. And I remember thinking, am I gonna die? Is he really trying to kill me? And the whole time he was laughing and smiling, and I honestly don't remember how I got him off of me, but I think that I must have used my legs and somehow rolled over. The next day, I almost forgot it even happened, until I realized my neck was sore and bruised when I was at school, and I texted him, he left bruises on my neck, and all I got in response was, oh, sorry. And I wish I could say this was the last time I hung out with him, but it wasn't. I actually forgot that it happened until weeks later when I was talking to a friend and she was horrified, so I decided that I never wanted to see him again and texted him that, and he said, that's understandable. And that's all I got. I had no idea what he would have done if we kept hanging out or if I was just a little weaker. Honestly, I don't want to think about it. And I'm posting this here because it's not something I can ever really talk about. Being a guy, the response that I've gotten is, you must have given him the wrong idea. He probably thought that you were just down to wrestle. But now that I'm older, I know what wrestling with your friends is, and it is always a mutually agreed upon thing. Not like that. And I'm still so confused. I'm 19 now and can't imagine treating someone like that. And yeah, our whole friend group at the time called me crazy and said I was overreacting for not wanting to hang out with them anymore, and they essentially cut me out. This incident occurred sometime in the fall of 2006. I grew up in a rural part of Ohio. My house had fairly dense woods located directly behind it. As a child, I had a passion for exploring. I especially loved exploring those woods. It was my favorite place to be. Prior to this incident, I had wandered through those woods many times, always with my mother's permission. There was one tree in particular that I frequently enjoyed to climb, usually about to the halfway mark so I could perch myself on one of the heavier branches and just relax as I listened to the peaceful sounds of nature. Climbing that tree for the very first time was quite an accomplishment. From that position, I could partially see the back of my house. On that day, after a fair amount of exploring, I carefully scaled my favorite tree. I seated myself on a sturdy branch and took in the view. Naturally, being late in October, the sun inevitably began to set within a few minutes. I always felt a little saddened to see the darkness approaching. The woods were like my own little sanctuary. I could entertain myself out there for hours. When darkness began to fall, however, my mother would stand at the edge of the woods and call my name until I obediently returned home, so not to be stranded out there after dark. After watching the sun set until I could no longer see it, I began my descent down the tree. I was nearly at the bottom when I heard my mother's familiar voice calling my name. I thought nothing of it at first, as this routine had occurred plenty of times before. Then I realized something strange as my feet touched the ground. My mother's voice was coming from behind me, deeper in the woods, rather than towards the entrance where she always stood when she called me home. My mom had never entered those woods before, at least not with me. I was eager to find her and show her all of my favorite spots before it grew too dark. That's when I realized something was off. How could she have gone into those woods ahead of me? Certainly I could have missed her, but as I said, she never entered those woods. She continued calling my name, but there was something strange about it. She sounded absolutely frantic, almost angry. Fearing that I was in trouble for reasons currently unknown, I froze in place. As her voice drew closer, I squinted my eyes to see if I could locate her and determine exactly how angry or upset she appeared to be. However, I didn't see anyone or anything unusual. Suddenly I heard her voice calling my name from the direction of my house, sounding much calmer. Seconds later, from somewhere within the woods yet again, it wasn't an echo. I wasn't imagining things. I was literally hearing her beckoning me from the edge of our backyard, as well as ahead of me. My legs suddenly turned to jelly. I couldn't quite comprehend what was going on. "Come here, right now," the voice that I originally believed to be hers screamed from just ahead. I realized that whoever or whatever was mimicking my mother was drawing closer. I didn't question which voice was actually my mother's, as there was something about the way it sounded that unnerved me. Terrified of what I would see if I stood there much longer, I turned around and ran towards the exit of the woods as quickly as my legs could possibly carry me. It was amazing that I didn't trip over anything in my haste. Even though my house wasn't very far away from me from where I was standing, those woods had never seemed larger to me than they did in that moment. From behind me, my mother's voice continued to call my name, now sounding desperate. Panic set in as my actual mother finally came into view, waiting patiently as she usually did until I returned home. In my frightened state, I absolutely refused to look back. As soon as I was out of the woods and in the backyard next to my mother, the other voice was suddenly gone. Rather than fading away, it seemed to stop the very moment I stepped foot into my backyard. I must have looked as frightened as I felt because my mother asked me what was wrong. Slowly but surely, my panic subsided. I didn't say anything until we were safely inside the house with our doors locked. I asked my mother if she had entered the woods. Appearing confused by the question, she told me that of course she didn't. With that confirmation, I hesitantly asked her if she had heard anyone else calling my name and yelling. The answer to that question was also no. Although I was still very much shaken up, I managed to explain everything that happened as clearly and rationally as possible. My mother was surprisingly nonchalant about the whole situation, explaining that I must have imagined it, that I was spending too much time out there by myself. The incident in those woods had stayed with me to this day. I can still hear this voice as clear as a bell. Whoever or whatever is calling my name sounded exactly like my mother, but I know it wasn't her. Not only was she waiting for me outside, but the voice also sounded strange in a way that I still can't fully explain. I didn't go back into the woods until I was 17 years old, and even then, I never hung out for very long. I've carefully gone over every possible explanation, but none of them seemed entirely plausible. It certainly wasn't my mother playing a prank. There was no way she could have pulled it off, not to mention the fact that she's never been one to play pranks. I also highly doubt that it was anyone else because, as I stated before, we lived in a very rural area. The closest neighbor was at least a mile away, and I wasn't personally acquainted with any of them. How could they have known my name and where to find me? We've since moved out of that house, but my mother and I occasionally discuss the incident. She still claims that she never heard or saw anything unusual out there. I know it probably shouldn't, but what happened in those woods continues to bother me. I spent many hours out there prior to that day and never had anything out of the ordinary occur. The best explanation I have at this point is a doppelganger or possibly a demon, but I'm unsure. If anyone has a possible explanation as to what might have happened, I'd love to hear it. So for context, we live in a 3-family home. My husband and I live on the second floor apartment, and you would not know where the door is unless you know where the door is. And our stairs are inside a covered porch area, and they're kind of hidden. So an older man with white hair showed up at our door yesterday and knocked on the door. My husband answered, and he started telling us that he was moving into the vacant apartment in the back of the house and that our landlord said that he could wait and move into it in May. Now mind you, we know our landlord well, and no way that she would let the apartment stay vacant until May. And he said he put down a deposit and she was holding it for him. He started asking us all about our utility bills, the landlord's last name and demeanor, to which my husband answered because he thought initially that he was our new neighbor. And he then noted my husband's accent and asked, "Are you a citizen in this country?" And my husband responded yes, and then he started sharing how, it's a good thing illegals are getting deported, and asking my husband political affiliations. The conversation turned kind of weird after that, and we're independents but vote democratically and believe in respecting all people. The man left and proclaimed, "I hope you voted for Trump," as he walked down the stairs. Now, long story short, we texted our landlord and asked if she knew this man and who was renting the back apartment, and she said, "I don't know him. A young mom is renting that apartment." It's safe to say that we are super creeped out, and fast forward, he showed up again today. We bought a door camera and now have him on video. We don't understand who this man is or what his intentions are. Is he some confused old man or someone with bad intentions towards interracial couples? I don't know.
I live with my great-grandparents, my grandma, my mom, and my brother. My great-grandparents got this house 50 years ago and have lived in it ever since. My grandpa passed away last October, and his stuff is currently in my closet. I stay in an old storage room, so everything that is not put into use is in my room. So ever since I got this mirror, around Thanksgiving, from my grandmother, crazy stuff has been happening. My grandmother got it from a kinda sorta not completely abandoned house. The landlord moved out of that house but left some of his stuff there, so my grandpa took some stuff, which is where the mirror came from. My grandparents lived in a bungalow behind the house. When cleaning out the house, I saw the mirror and asked my grandmother if I could have it because I thought it was pretty. I did not know how old the mirror is, but it's kind of worn down. Anyways, the mirror was sitting on the bookshelf because I hadn't hung it up yet. One day I was cleaning my room and the mirror literally flipped and landed in the middle of my room. There was no logical way that this could have happened because I did not make any movement that could have caused it to flip, and it went too far. It was kind of like someone pushed it. The mirror didn't crack. It was completely fine, so I didn't think much of it and set it on my dresser so it wouldn't fall again. Maybe 2 weeks after that, my deodorant was sitting on my headboard and flipped and landed in the middle of my room. At the time, I was on my phone with my boyfriend, so I told him about it, put the deodorant back, jokes around a bit, and that was it. Now, we were going to talk about things that have recently happened. So me and my boyfriend have basically been stepping our relationship up a bit. And anytime we talk about something like that or we are up to something over the phone, something weird happens. So I went to shower while I was Skyping him and my phone started messing up, so the call ended. I ran out of the shower and called him back ASAP. Took me like 5 minutes. One night after we were talking about things, it was around 3:30 a.m., he was asleep and we were still on the phone. My closet door started wiggling back and forth and that continued all night. I can't remember anything else that happened because I've gotten so used to it by now. Tonight I was doing something and the bottle that was on my headboard fell right next to my head. Maybe it's because I was moving a lot, I'm not sure, but that freaked me out. And just now as I'm typing this, the wax warmer or lamp got darker and then got brighter. I was talking to 2 of my friends about it and they told me some story about what has happened at my house. The first friend said my Harley Quinn doll fell off my dresser shelf. It's old and it has a huge mirror and 2 shelves on each side, and landed on my floor, so she picked it up and set it on my dresser. When she came back, it was sitting on my bookshelf.
My other friend said she woke up and randomly in the middle of the night, she couldn't move and saw a white figure in the corner of my room, and she started crying. Both of them just now informed me about this tonight. I also have a porcelain doll that I got from my 5th grade dance as a prize. I'm in 10th grade now. I did not know the history of the doll, but it had moved before. It's a doll with brown hair and she's a bridesmaid. It started turning and moving on its own, so my mom took it and put it in the top of her closet, maybe the beginning of this year, and we haven't taken it out since. But I've been talking about it. Now, I'm not so sure if I want to or not. Honestly, don't know what to do at this point. I don't know what's going on, and it creeps me out. I'm scared to move, and if you want pictures of the objects, I can give them to you in the morning. It's currently 2:55 a.m. Can someone help me or tell me what to do? It would be much appreciated. Thank you for reading. To keep in mind that I was 20 years old and very naive. You're going to think that I'm stupid, and I know I was. Probably lucky to be alive, and God do I know that, and I kick myself whenever I think about this to this day. I just wanted to get some other opinions. Maybe I'm wrong about him. So about 20 years ago, I was walking down the road in a not-so-great area. It was summertime, and I was dressed appropriately for the heat, shorts and a tank top. I'm very thin and was downright skinny, and I've gotten mistaken for a lady of the night more times than I care to admit, and this may or may not be important to the story. So anyways, I was walking to pick up my son from daycare, and as I'm going about my way, a truck full of men started to catcall and follow me. They turned around several times to yell at me out of the window, and I was getting nervous about it. I was passing a gas station parking lot, and a man not much older than myself stopped in a nice car and asked if I would like a ride. He didn't seem scary, and he was attractive, so I said okay and got in his car. Sheesh, I wish I could smack myself now. So I get into the car with him, and he asks where I'm going. I tell him it's about a mile straight down the road that I'm on, and he starts going the wrong way and just tells me he needs to turn around, and I pay very little mind to it. He starts to ask me about myself, so I tell him. I was escaping a DV situation and was staying in a woman's shelter nearby. I was telling him how closely my activities were monitored and that I was due to pick up my son any minute. I think this may actually be what saved me. And at some point I notice that he takes another wrong turn, but I don't know the area at all, so when I point it out, he says that he's taking a shortcut or something, and I just go back to talking like an idiot. Then I get a whiff of something. I know now that the smell was death, decompositional death. And I know this for sure now. I didn't then, though. I turn around and look in the back seat, looking for spoiled food or something like that, and the car is absolutely spotless. I bring up the smell and he brushes it off and changes the subject, but for some reason the smell just started getting stronger. My stupid self brings it up again. What is that smell? And he says he doesn't know, probably something he forgot to take out and has gone bad. When I tell you guys that there was not a crumb in that vehicle, I'm baffled. But eventually he drops me off, safe to my destination, and he doesn't tell me his name, ask for my number, or give me his, and I don't think much of it until much later when I smell that smell again. But this time I know what it is, and it triggers the memory of that guy in the car. This was probably 2005 in Covington, Kentucky, and I'm pretty sure that him being aware that not only would I be missed, I would be missed quickly and my movements would be tracked very specifically was the reason that I made it back out of that car that day. Now, I assume most people that browse here are at least somewhat believers of the supernatural. I, however, am not. It probably makes no sense that I am posting my stories here, but although I believe it to be my own mind, you might perceive my stories differently. For context, I was diagnosed with schizophrenia about 2 years ago, although the psychologist said it was a minor case, whatever that means. For years, I've struggled with illusions, figments of my imagination. Although I have seen a variety of oddities throughout the years, 4 have remained consistent. I will briefly describe these 3 conjurations. 1. The Man. This one is the simplest. The easiest to describe and least unnerving. I see this man in corners. He stands still as stone. Whether he is facing me or not is impossible to tell. All I can make out is the silhouette. That's about it for him. He doesn't do anything aside from that. He doesn't appear on camera, which supports my belief that it is a figment of my imagination. 2. The tall figure. This one scares me. I see it outside, whether it's standing behind a wall, peering over me, or in and out of the hallway by the doorframe of my room. I get a strange feeling when this one is nearby, a heavy weight in my chest, and my biggest concern about this one is that my friends claim to have seen it too. In fact, one has taken multiple photos, and some of them appear to have this strange formation, which I will post if requested. 3. The crawling thing. Simply the thought of this makes my hair stand up and brings tears to my eyes. I've seen this guy more than any of the others, and this thing quickly scurries towards me only to vanish when my eyes adjust enough to almost make out what it is. I hear whispering and sometimes screaming just before I see it. On one occasion, I was holding my cat, walking from the kitchen down the short passageway to my room when something screamed in my ear. I let out a loud and fast scream and had to catch my breath. I realized that I had dropped my cat. I turned to see her staring into the darkness, eyes fixated on something. I simply stared. I saw something move in the darkness. I rushed to grab my cat and ran into my room. I entered panic mode. I locked the door and closed the windows. I understand now that that's stupid and would have made no difference, but the genuine fear had clouded my mind. Instinct kicked in, and I needed to be isolated. I sometimes feel like I'm losing my mind. My anxiety is consistent, and I barely sleep without medication. I will continue to try and document these things. I will try to catch them on camera. Perhaps I tell myself they're in my head because that way I know they can't physically affect me. But of course, I might be wrong. Time will tell. Delusion refers to a strong, consuming belief in something that is untrue. Religious delusions involve beliefs concerning religious ideologies or figures. Psychosis refers to a collection of symptoms that affect the mind, where there has been some sort of loss of contact with reality. Now, forgive me if this post is a bit scrambled. I just wanted to give some context. I'm on my 3rd glass of wine and contemplating life right now. My brother, Brian, and I grew up very close. Movie nights with the family, family dinners, game nights, holidays, family road trips, all very normal stuff. And we eventually grew up, and now, both in our 20s, moved away from home. I haven't seen him recently, but we text here and there to confirm aliveness, and Brian suddenly became extremely religious nearly overnight. I'm talking extremely religious. Now, I don't judge anyone, but no one in our family is particularly religious, and he does not have religious friends. He found a church in his new city that he is giving his life to, and he is completely isolated, and his only friend is the priest. He is secretive about what church it is, and he spends all of his time there, I guess. Brian is there late night every day, supposedly helping clean up, but that just doesn't sit right with me. They took a missions trip to Mexico recently, and I can only imagine what in the world went on there. The only media that he consumes is religious, and he has no friends outside of the church, and he only goes to church outside of work. Before ending each conversation, he will ask, "Are you ready to give your life to God or suffer in hell?" So, you can at least see what I'm experiencing on my end. It's all very strange. He recently took a trip back home to visit our family. My mom says the whole thing just felt wrong. He sat silent much of the time, observing. Otherwise, he looked far removed even while looking right at her. His energy filled the room and made her uncomfortable, and he was no longer the bubbly and affectionate guy that he's always been. He kept his distance and had nothing to say, and when he left, she said that she doesn't expect that he'll actually come back. Once a month, we catch up by playing video games together. We'll play for hours, and this is sort of our bonding time, and I entertain his religious conversations regardless of my opinion. Our last game night, he had so much fun that he wouldn't let me log off until about 2 a.m., and I recently found out that he gave his console away to a church member. I was upset. It felt like he didn't think about what that meant. We are not the phone call types, but we love video games and played growing up together, so game nights were perfect. He called me the other night to address that issue. He gave it away because his future wife, a premonition by the way, is coming, and she wouldn't like him playing with other girls, and he doesn't have time for anything except the church. I know this sounds absolutely too insane to be real, but unfortunately, it is. He assured me that he will be completely cutting me off because his premonition wife is more important than his relationship with me, his family. He spoke with such clarity that it was terrifying to be so deluded yet so sure of yourself. What type of church influences you to cut off family and friends? Apparently he'll be moving overseas to find his so-called premonition wife soon, and I was shocked. Premonition? Really? Our dad called him, and when he asked, "For you to need to cut your sister off, you must feel for her in another way than as your sister." And Brian avoided the question and didn't answer. Yeah, I know. How could it get worse than a premonition wife? Well, I'm sick for many reasons. Losing sleep, and I fear that my brother is in some sort of cult while under some sort of religious psychosis, on top of ruining our relationship with possible feelings towards me, his sister, and I'm a mess of confusion. What in the hillbilly F is going on, and how could it get worse? My mother believes it's his attempt at removing the temptation, aka me, from his life, and I'm stuck between wanting to understand what the hell type of church this is, and also agreeing, let's not meet. No one knows what to say to me, and I can't blame them. I'm mourning what was once our relationship, but the situation gives me chills, and I don't know where to go from here. All I can think of is this one quote that I read before. The more devout they are, the uglier their faith will become, since it's all based on a lie.
Number 1. I was an exchange student from Malaysia and was placed in Missouri in 2006. They were a family of 4, son and daughter, and they lived somewhere around Webster Groves. They looked nice, warm, and welcoming, but it was all a facade, for they were trying to gain my trust. Coming from a country where all neighbors are practicing a million different religions would kind of desensitize you or make you very aware. I was the latter. The first week was fine, but sometimes I would wake up a little early and find them gathered in the kitchen in a circle, around the kitchen table, mumbling and whispering. They'd stop as soon as I entered. It was very disconcerting, but I brushed it off thinking it was an American quirk. During the second and third week, it became worse. The boy wouldn't touch me because I'm born from sin, his words, and the girl was afraid of me because I spoke to the father whilst looking him in the eye. I started prodding her for answers whenever little things that I did, which are normal by the way, like reading before bed, talking directly to the parents, eating a sandwich, would elicit small gasps and hyperventilation. She told me that I have residues of the wicked and that I'm going to hell. She told me about a cleanse and a daily prayer wash. I've seen them singing the same hymns over and over again, reciting the same verses in different tones, and it really freaked me out. I wasn't stupid. I realized I was in a cult when they took me to church. I was made to sit in the front, and the pastor was conducting the service specifically for me. I realized it when I looked around and saw that everyone was looking at me. I felt like I was in a horror movie. Wide-eyed, silent stares. Men and women were separated. People wore different colored ribbons on their wrists, and the children looked haunted or just plain frightened. Nobody spoke to me or even came close to me. The men never looked me in the eye, and the women whispered and shunned me I went there twice. School was on break, so I had to stay in with them. Many weird things happened, but none was as bad as waking up in the middle of the night to find the mother sitting next to my bed, reciting verses from the Bible in the dark. As soon as I'd awake, she'd stop and silently walk away. The family began treating me badly after that. I was punished for being out of line. No dinner, locked in till morning, no sweet drinks. I had to cover up with long sleeve tops, long pants or skirt, etc. I think I only lasted because I was curious. They probably thought since I'm from Southeast Asia, I must be quite gullible and naive. They tried brainwashing me about how sinful I was, how lost I was, how the world is going to end and I'll be dragged into hell unless I accept their teachings. I was there for a month before our chapter coordinator came by for a visit. I told her everything, outside the house naturally, and I left with her immediately. We came back with a group of people from the exchange organizations about an hour later and found them in the midst of burning the things of the sinful non-believer. Thankfully, my passport and other relevant documents were untouched. I never found out what kind of cult they were. Number 2. I want to try to be concise and still give a proper breakdown of my time growing up in a cult. I'm going to start by breaking down the ideology. Second coming of Christ. They believe the second coming is, or was, alive. He was a Korean man who went by the name of Reverend Sun Myung Moon. He was given the mission by Jesus in a vision when he was 16 years old on a mountaintop, and it is his purpose to create an example of the ideal family so all may shape their families in its likeness and create an ideal world. Restoration of the fall. Jesus forgives your sins, but what about restoring humanity to what it was before the fall by paying spiritual indemnities and cleansing humanity of those sins in the first place? Their idea of indemnity is almost like paying karma forward. You can put yourself through misery to either pay for past mistakes of humanity or to ensure good things will happen in the future. You can pay indemnity by 1. Living in a van for years and years on one of their task force fundraising by selling candles or wind chimes, sometimes more than 14 hours a day. 2. Getting an arranged marriage after abstaining from absolutely any contact with the opposite sex all of your life by the Reverend himself, or now your parents, thereby overcoming the temptation of the fall by denying your desires and obeying the church completely. Actually, this is the most important aspect of the church, that you'll get matched and blessed. Their word for marriage is the only thing that will eventually restore humanity. 3. Converting other members. 4. Doing hundreds or thousands of bows to a picture of Reverend Moon every night for X amount of days. 5. Taking cold showers every day for X days. 6. Fasting. You can drink water for a providential number of days, either 3, 7, 21, or 40. Now note, you must do a 7-day fast before you can get married. 7. Giving money offerings to the church. The church also started charging for ancestor liberation in the last couple of decades. Just like old school Catholics, you pay to have your dear old granddad hoisted out of the pits of hell. Since the church is Korean, they have deep resentment towards the Japanese, and ancestor liberation can be thousands of dollars per person liberated. For Americans, it was a little over 100, I think. 8. Beat yourself to repetitive chants at an approved spirit-cleansing event. 9. Or basically denying yourself of any human comfort or need for some time. Some do sleep deprivation conditions. There's a lot else, but I can't keep going. Growing up in the church, there are countless strange rituals in the church. Like on your birthday, you and your whole family have to wake up at 5 a.m., go to your altar of Reverend Moon, say a prayer, and offer food. When the ritual is almost over, the birthday kid usually has to take the food and offer some to each of the family members, and you always leave some on the altar. There are countless stories told to the second generation, or children born from marriages approved by Reverend Moon, since we're supposed to have been born as purely as Jesus without original sins. Stories of members who left the church and immediately got hit by a bus, or became prostitutes and died of ODing, or killed themselves out of guilt. Now Korea in the church is seen as the New Jerusalem, Koreans being the new, chosen people. Every leader in the church is a Korean, despite the religion's heavy unification of world cultures and religions overtones. Koreans often were only matched to other Koreans. None of Moon's kids were allowed to marry anyone other than a Korean. Japanese members have always been the church's cash cow, guilting them into paying more in tithing and overcharging them for everything. Americans got their fair share of that too. The church often comes up with a new ceremony, like a holy wine ceremony, where drinking this new blessed wine, usually juice, will heal you of all your sins, that of course you have to pay to get into. Sometimes they just make a big plea for extra money, like their total life offering, which was something like, if you paid the church $16,000, you would never have to pay them for anything again, which was a lie. Some members took out second mortgages on their house to pay these offerings. I will say, in response to people in this thread who ask how someone could fall for this, and how people could stay in it for so long, cults like this never approach it like, hey, a Korean guy is the Messiah, you want to join? They take you through steps, almost like Scientology, but not so clearly defined. The Unification Church was going around in America in the 70s, preaching for true love and family values, stuff many people, especially people with Christian backgrounds, can get behind. The church does have heavy Christian influence, so much that the language is the same, but they'll start discussing things with you, like the evils in the world. If Jesus restored the world, then why would there need to be a second coming? We should prepare ourselves for the next Messiah. A Messiah is exactly what we need. How else can we right the wrongs of this world? Once you get them going on that, you just pump them with all the same religious feel-good stuff. God is our Father. God is watching out for you. He wants the best for you. God hurts when you don't do what's right. And eventually God becomes some kind of emotionally sensitive dude you have to coddle and take care of. Then, once your members are pumped, they're living in vans, they're trying to recruit other people. That's when you start with the deeper shit. You know, the Messiah is here. The tension has been building to this moment for literally years. The members are overjoyed and can't wait to do anything this guy says so they can be like Jesus' first disciples. No one thinks they're a victim. They think they're literally saving the world. It appealed to a lot of people who were raised Christian. but were dissatisfied with the contradictions or shortcomings of their parents' religion. Number 3. I was married to a Scientologist. Well, Scientology is weird. It's all-consuming, as most cults are. My ex-husband only knew and associated with people in Scientology. However, all his friends were actually very, very nice and really cool to me. I made a lot of friends through him. I never felt outwardly pressured to join Scientology, but the insidiousness was absolutely there, and I'll get to that. Ex-husband was raised in it. You could say he was a second-generation Scientologist. His parents joined back in the L.R. Ron Hubbard days, and they were in it. They both worked for the church as auditors. They were dirt poor. All of their money went to the church. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. They were so deep in debt, they had no health insurance and no money for anything except rent for their tiny, run-down apartment. That part made me the saddest. They were nice people. Now, I married him back when I was younger, more idealistic and willing to overlook major differences. I was a bit lost myself and really just looking to connect with anyone. I was always atheist and actually really against organized religion, but he always assured me that Scientology was not something he was active in and that it wouldn't be a problem. He wasn't taking any courses at the time we dated and were engaged, so I believed him that Scientology was more like his parents' thing than his. After we got engaged, he started telling me how a friend of his needs some help. She was training to become an auditor, the e-meter thing you hear about, and needed someone to practice on. I declined. He kept asking and insisted that it's just for her practice. It doesn't mean I'm doing Scientology and that it would mean a lot to him. So I did. And what a silly experience. Honestly, it's just ridiculous. You sit in a room with the auditor, hold these cans. Let me tell you, the rigmarole they use to get the cans set right so they pick up your wavelengths, or whatever they call it, is laughable. Lotion on the hands, squeeze the cans. That didn't work? Go for a walk, drink some water. Lotion again, squeeze the stupid cans. All this over and over until something on the auditor's end says it's all working now, and then you're good to go. I lied through the whole thing. They acted like I made some amazing breakthroughs. I got a floating needle, and then that was it. However, I was then called over and over and over to come back. What the hell? I thought this was a one-time thing to help this chick out. Nope. They were all over me. They wanted 3-hour sessions, days in a row, on weekdays. No wonder Scientologists are all poor as shit. They want you in constantly during work days. I became so disagreeable to them that they actually gave up calling me to get me in. I guess they figured me being married to one of them is enough to eventually get me. The Scientologists on the lower portion of the bridge tend to know nothing about the Xenu stuff. I asked them, and they acted like they'd never heard of it. I guess you don't get to read that tech till way later, a few 100,000 deep. The overriding insidiousness I saw was the learned ability to scam people. I witnessed a Scientologist's own business get taken down by the feds for frauding their clients. Now, The reason I divorced him was because he stole a large sum of money from my account that was not to be touched. It just vanished, and he had nothing to say for it. He opened 2 credit cards in my name and maxed them out. He put me into financial ruin. It was a disaster. Number 4. I was born and raised in a cult, and considered myself a member up until I left my parents' home at the age of 18. The group I was associated with is not well known, but the effects on the members are tragic and undeniable. We were literally brainwashed. We had weekly services with a set program: 3 hymns, prayer, sermonette, hymn, announcements, main message, hymn, prayer. It never altered from that layout. As well, the messages we would hear were often videotaped sermons from maybe 5 main people at headquarters. The topics were extremely narrow: prophecy, the end is coming, self-improvement, all of you suck and you should hate yourselves, setting ourselves apart, don't talk to worldly people, they will taint you. There were many ways in which we were indirectly encouraged to harm ourselves. Many people looked down upon modern medicine and felt that using it was a way of turning away from God, slapping him in the face, making it clear he wasn't needed. I personally knew people who died for their faith, waiting for God to heal them. On the other hand, when any of the main leaders fell ill, they were immediately rushed off to receive medical care. They controlled our diet. We pretty much were kosher, though they denied all influence or association from or with Jews. There were annual days of fasting, and whenever the leadership could scare up enough drama within the members, they would declare a church-wide fast so we could all get closer to God and resolve our issues. We fasted when the church's income was said to be dropping. We fasted when the leaders were ill. We fasted when people died. We had our own personal fasts for the hell of it, or when we felt especially guilty and out of touch with God. Parents were encouraged to get their children involved as young as possible. My parents tell me I started observing the annual fast when I was 3 years old. I remember one year when my brother was 2 or 3. At one point during the day, he just broke down sobbing because he was so thirsty. And yeah, we abstained from food and drink. We got obscenely dehydrated every time. Looking back, I just don't understand how a parent can behave that way. And they were so sex negative, I can't even describe it. We spent so much time and energy frantically thinking, I can't think about sex, that it was all we thought about. It was evil, dirty, wrong, and it would hurt if we weren't married. I literally built up so much fear over it that when I did finally have sex, as an unmarried adult, I had literally developed vaginismus, a sexual pain condition. The cause is often psychological. In my case, being so afraid of it hurting, that it hurt, which further fed into my fear. There was actually an entire message once where one of the leaders took on the subject, "Are we a cult?" And he actually went through a checklist with us. His conclusion that we were a cult, but that it was a good thing. We should be proud, only not. Pride is a sin. We should be pleased. You had to be baptized before a minister would marry you. You couldn't be baptized and marry someone else who wasn't. You couldn't marry outside the church. Some ministers wouldn't baptize you if they thought your only incentive was to get married. There were rampant cases of sexual abuse from the leadership, but we were always too fearful to report it, always taught that it must have, in some way, been our fault. Traditional gender roles were enforced, i.e., women stay home, pop out babies, cook and clean. Men were to work and support the home. Having children, and lots of them, was strongly encouraged. Be fruitful and multiply, and all that shit. Adoption was frowned upon, even for those who were unable to have their own children. So many families were living in poverty because there was just too many children to take care of. God forbid that any of them have a medical condition that required constant treatment. We were robbed on a regular basis. They called it tithing. Not only did we give 10% of our entire income, but we were also to set a second 10% aside to be used at a 7-day religious convention of sorts every year. And on every third year, we would give an additional 10% to the church. Imagine losing 20% of your income every year and 30% every third year. Imagine being poor to begin with. Imagine being told you are poor because you have been literally stealing from God by not diligently paying your tithes.
About 2 weeks ago, I booked an Airbnb in another country. I was going there for a concert. The room was cheap, so I knew that I wasn't going to stay in a 5-star hotel, but it was only for one night, so I didn't mind as long as I had a bed. And to start off, it already wasn't a great trip because my data roaming apparently didn't work in that country at all. I logged into a cafe Wi-Fi and planned my route in advance as best I could, and I managed to be at the house in time and rang the only bell and waited. Nobody came out. I repeatedly rang and waited 5 minutes, and I noticed the door had a slot for mail and looked through it. And I was shocked to see an entrance that looked like an abandoned barn. A super dusty couch right in front of the door, pieces of furniture covered in cloth, very dirty and extremely old, and I usually love old houses, but that just did not look like a house that was in use or prepared for guests at all. I wondered if I was at the wrong house and what to do now. As a super old, unwashed-looking guy walked towards the door from the street, I asked him if he knew where the Airbnb was, and he mumbled something which I interpreted as positive, so I asked him if he was Tim, my host, and he said yes and opened the door for me. Well, I already described the entrance. The centerpiece was definitely the super old creaky staircase that led to the upper part of the house, and I followed him upstairs. He was heaving and coughing and stinking of cigarettes, which wasn't exactly pleasant, but fine, I guess. And the second floor was also abandoned looking, super dark, with clustered furniture hung with cloth and randomly thrown together in a super creepy curtain that I couldn't catch a glimpse behind. Another stair up, and we were in my hallway, which was honestly the worst one. Cracks in the wall, old rural paintings and crosses hung up next to them. It seriously looked like the set of a horror movie. I usually don't have a problem with decor like that. I'm a goth, so anything darkly inclined is my jam. But everything looked so badly taken care of, so I got major creepo vibes from this house. He showed me to the bathroom, which had a huge hole missing in the bathtub tiling in the wall, and everything looked super dirty. He showed me to the bedroom, which was honestly okay, and there was just a lot of creepy dolls on the shelves that just completely threw me off, but the bed seemed fine. I asked him if they had Wi-Fi, and he said no, which sucks. And I really hoped that they would have that because that meant that I would have no way to communicate in there. And I also asked him when the checkout was the next day, and he said it doesn't matter, whatever that meant. He then dragged himself up to the 4th story, which was in complete pitch black darkness, by the way, so that obviously gave me weird vibes too. I definitely didn't want to get in the shower, so I just quickly changed and charged my phone. When I went to the bathroom, I realized that I didn't even notice the creepiest part. There were no locks at all. Not for the bathroom, not for the toilet, and not for my room, which freaked me out, and I also noticed that there were so many half-used items that someone, looked like guests before me, had left there, like shower gels and toothbrushes and toothpaste. A random lash curler just lay abandoned on the shelf, not sort of like a here you go for your use in case you forget yours way, but it just looked like someone left it and nobody bothered to clean it away. I already made up my mind that I would definitely not be staying the night in this house. My mind was just kind of spinning with different scenarios. What if all of these products were left by people before me? And why did nobody leave horrendous reviews because they all got murdered? I was super spooked and seriously debated if I should take all my stuff to the concert because it did not feel safe in the slightest. But my back was really hurting from my heavy backpack, so I just took my essentials and left the room as soon as I could. Not without sliding a folded paper under the door, so I'd see if someone tried to open it in my absence. When I was coming down the stairs, I heard someone turning a key in the front door. I was a bit confused, but in the advertisement it said that a couple lived there, so I expected to see a sort of wife or girlfriend of the guy I'd already met. Instead, a middle-aged man enters and says, "Hi, I'm Tim." All I could think of is, then who is that other guy? And I was pooping myself inside, but I had brief small talk with him and finally left the house. And I was quite shook. Luckily, I made it in time to the venue and the concert was worth it. And afterwards, I was so tired that I knew that I couldn't stay awake for the whole night, so I checked into a hostel. That was also not perfectly clean, but at least they had Wi-Fi and a proper shower and a door that had a lock. And the next day I got thrown out at 10 a.m., so I made my way to the rest of my stuff. I don't know why, but I checked the mail slot again and jumped back. The old guy was just snoring on the couch directly in front of the entrance door. The strangest part about him was that he was now wearing, and I'm not joking when I say this, a Snorlax onesie. You know, like the Pokemon? And even stranger, I saw that he was hooked up to oxygen, some tank which was slightly sprawled out across the floor, the line leading up to his nose. And I had to sneak past him to get my stuff. I went upstairs, and my door was left slightly open, which I thought was very strange. As I gathered my things, I noticed the hair curlers now smelled like they'd recently been used, almost like that burnt hair smell that you get from too much heat on hair. And at that moment, I didn't wait around to find out or ask if someone had been in my room. I quickly grabbed my stuff and tried to silently bolt back down the stairs to the door. I wasn't really paying attention as I made a direct line for the exit, and I accidentally tripped over the old guy's oxygen tubes, ripping them out of the tank. It immediately let out a loud hissing sound, and the old man woke up almost instantly, gasping for air. In that moment, I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I was so freaked out that I just said "I'm sorry" a million times and ran to the door, threw it open, and bolted out. I don't know if I overreacted, but honestly, from the beginning with those two guys to the missing locks and a checkout like that, if I had assumed the worst, this could have been the perfect setup to assault or murder someone. In best case scenario, nothing would have happened, but I probably would have had panic attacks all night. Usually I love solo traveling, but this all was just way too much. Number 1. I was messaged by a girl on Plenty of Fish. Let's call her Ashley. It was one of those conversations that immediately took off, and we were talking for at least 4 hours straight. We decided to go get dinner. She was even better in person. Beautiful, witty, laughed at all my stupid jokes and the whole bit. We exchanged goodbyes, and that was the end of our evening. We were texting until about midnight when she says, "You're going to hate me. We should just be friends." So I'm like, okay,
whatever. She calls me the next day and apologizes, so I give her a second chance. At the end of this date, we start making out like we were in middle school, and she stops us before we get too far and says she's not ready for that yet. Okay, cool. I can respect that. So I get home, and she texts me saying that I was just going to use her had we had sex and calling me a pig. Okay. So the next day, I get a text from Ashley's phone asking if I knew where she was, and I was the last person to talk to her. Her friend went to her house, where Ashley had apparently left her phone in her car, and the front door was wide open. So I told this mystery person to call the cops. When she refused, I said that I would, and lo and behold, Ashley shows up. I had just gone for a walk. Didn't know you cared about me so much, lol. Yeah, okay, I'm done with this situation. The next day I go to work. I usually leave my phone in my truck until lunch. So when I went out for lunch at noon, I had 115 new texts and 48 missed calls. Yep, that's it. I'm done. So I block her number and that's it. Wrong again. She knew where I worked and a rough estimate of the time I got off work, which is almost an hour and a half from where she lived. She tried following me home. I could see her car, and I took a roundabout way of getting home and even ran a few red lights, but managed to lose her. It's been almost a year, and I haven't heard from her since. Number 2. So this was from OkCupid. Now, I'm a chick of the larger variety, and I always post a current body shot because I don't like when people waste my time if they're not going to be into me. I never got why people post misleading photos, like people aren't going to notice when you meet. So I was talking to this guy. He seemed nice enough, and he asked me to buy me dinner. Okay, sure. He had only posted a face shot. When we met in person, he was easily clearing over 450 pounds. Not really into that, but I stuck it out because he seemed like a nice person. We get coffee first, and then walked over to the restaurant. Now, I'm no athlete, but I do like to hike and rough it in the woods from time to time camping. I may not be winning any marathons, but I can walk for miles. This poor dude was wheezing within 20 feet of walking. Clearly it was an effort for him. I felt bad for the guy, and I try to be open-minded, but I can't date someone that unhealthy. We get to the restaurant, which was really good, and he tells me about himself and his life. He told me about his roommate, who was dating a crackhead. They would fuck all over the place with the doors open, do all kinds of hard drugs, and were just slovenly dicks. He also told me he was a dom, in the BDSM sort of variety, and started to imply we could go make out later and he would top me. I said I had to leave after dinner and scooted as soon as it was polite to do so. 6 to 7 months later, I try my luck again, this time with a photographer. We got along okay, conversation went well, and in the course of the date he asked me about bad dates I'd been on. I brought up the larger guy from before and mentioned the wheezing and the pushing to top me. He asked if the guy's name was so-and-so. Turns out, I was on a date with the guy's roommate. I don't use dating sites anymore. Number 3. I went along with a friend on her first date with this guy she met on OkCupid. She was nervous about meeting him alone, so he told her to bring a friend and he'd bring one of his friends. She tells the guy I'm not single. He says that doesn't matter. His friend is cool with it and just likes to meet new people. I also like to meet new people and I'm willing to help her out, so I agree. Fast forward to the bar. Guy shows up and he's gotta be as old as my dad, which, whatever, she likes older guys. He still seemed kind of too old for her, but it's none of my business. He also came alone. Perhaps he figured he'd score 2 women at once this way. He sits down and everything immediately goes to hell. Guy keeps telling us about how gorgeous I am while trying to touch my friend, trying to get her to hug him, putting his hand on her knee, telling her to smile, stuff like that. Just being really obnoxious. She finally tells him he needs to stop touching her. He tells her to relax and keeps winking at us. Tells me I need to control her, telling us we're so gorgeous and so beautiful over and over again, as though he'd hit the magic number of compliments and we just rip our clothes off right then and there. Friend and I are giving each other the serious eyebrows. So I try to engage him. Tell me about yourself. What's your job? I make a lot of money. Wink. What do you like to do in your free time, etc.? He just keeps giving us stupid, vague answers like he's being coy, and just keeps repeating how pretty we are. Seeing that we're not going for it, he starts telling us, somewhat irritably, that we're just on scholarship. I ask him what that means, and he just winks again. This fucking guy. So I say, let me tell you what I think that means. I think that you're upset that we're not excited that a man of your age and means is spending time trying to woo us, and that we're only behaving this way because we're young and attractive. Is that what you're trying to say? He says no. I start to ask him again what on scholarship means, and he interrupts me, holds up his finger, and says, "You're gorgeous, but you really need to stop talking." Date over. Friend and I are agape. He fucking winks again, like he didn't just tell me to shut my mouth. Friend says, "Okay, we're done here. Good night." We stand up and go to another table in the same bar. He doesn't follow, though he does come by later to apologize. Apology not accepted. Saw him around the bar later trying to foist his charms on other young women hanging about and having just about as much luck. What a douche. Number 4. Around March of 2014, I started talking to this girl on Tinder. She seemed cool and fun, and after about a week of talking, she suggested we meet up in person. She invited me to this coffee shop and I accepted. However, the day of, she started messaging me saying she had to tell me something. Her pictures on Tinder weren't actually of her, and yes, she was a guy. He claimed he really liked talking to me though, and begged me to still meet up with him. And naturally, I declined. I blocked his profile and continued on with my life. About a week later, I started talking to another girl. Once again, she seemed cool and fun and we hit it off. She asked me if I spoke to people on Tinder frequently, and rather stupidly, I told her about my previous encounter with the man lady. She asked me if I wanted to meet up, and I said sure, as long as it was in a public place. We decided on a cafe, and the next day I sat at the table, waiting. 5, 10, 15 minutes had passed, and she was nowhere to be found. I then peered out the window and saw, from across the street, a man staring at me intently. I looked away, waited a few seconds, and looked back. He was still standing there. At that point, I left the cafe, got on my bike, and booked it home. I was definitely a little freaked out, but tried to pull myself together and reason that no one could have followed me. I then deleted my Tinder profile, and things were normal for a few weeks. About 3 weeks later, I started getting phone calls. The numbers all showed up as unknown. I picked up the first few times to some guy breathing heavily into the phone. I was already a little freaked out. After about a day, I stopped picking up any call unless it displayed the caller's name. I then started receiving text. At first, they were pretty harmless, calls for attention and begging me to meet in person. It then changed to very sexual texts until eventually the messages became threatening, and whoever was messaging me started throwing out my family and friends' names and whereabouts, saying she would get them involved unless I answered. Because they were texting me, I could see a displayed number, but when I called phone providers, they told me the number couldn't be traced and that it was probably a track phone. Great. I waited about 2 weeks, not responding to the texts, thinking I shouldn't feed the troll. But eventually it became too much. I started getting upwards of 50 texts and phone calls a day. I would wake up to 10 to 20 texts every morning. I then decided to change my number altogether. The texting and calls stopped for a while, but sure enough, it started happening again. I called my phone provider asking if they ever gave out numbers at a user's request, and they said their policies stated that they wouldn't and couldn't unless valid identification was provided. Then one day, I tried logging into my Facebook, but was denied. Within a day, friends started contacting me asking what the hell I was doing, saying that they were getting terrible messages from my account. In particular, one of my girlfriends was receiving messages about her mom who died years ago. I apologized profusely and told people what was going on. I contacted Facebook and explained the situation, and they helped me access my account again, at which point I deactivated it for a while. Enough was enough. I decided to contact the FBI, explaining what had been going on for over a month now. They documented everything, but told me since I, or any of my relatives and friends were in no immediate danger, they probably wouldn't be able to do anything. At that point, I felt stuck. I thought about hiring a private investigator or a hacker. I decided against it, however, and just hope it would fade out if I never answered. I left my Facebook deactivated and ignored any texts or phone calls. I never had any trouble at home, but some of my closest friends received the occasional texts as well, which weirded us all out. I hated that they got dragged into it. One day I came home and things felt very eerie. Doors unlocked, windows open, and no one home. A strong breeze running through the apartment. I did a check of the place and found nothing else weird, so I locked everything up and just waited for my roommates to get home. It's been almost 7 months now. The calls and texts have more or less stopped. I'll get an occasional text, but at most once every 2 weeks. At the peak of it, I was receiving almost 100 texts a day. It definitely affected my social and personal life. I became much more wary of the people around me and my surroundings. I just felt like I couldn't really focus on anything until this stopped. Work was difficult, though I tried to maintain my composure as best I could. Everything was just weird. Life was weird. I've since stopped using all forms of dating apps and websites. Things are getting back to normal at this point, and I just want to put it all behind me. I'm moving at the end of this year so it'll be nice to have a fresh start at a new place. I'm not going to sit here and say all dating apps are dangerous and no one should use them, but definitely cover your bases. Ask more questions before meeting someone. FaceTime them first, Skype, anything. I was naive about it, and I regret it. Be safe, stick close to your friends, and try meeting people in more traditional ways.